Hello and welcome to this Regcast on DevOps and hybrid cloud. These are two complicated topics, and with me I have three esteemed gentlemen from the industry to explain what they're about, both DevOps and hybrid cloud. We're talking about DevOps first, then hybrid cloud, and we'll be explaining about how those things come together to produce faster application delivery and development. And so, without further ado, I'd like you to introduce yourselves. Dale Vile, our tame, as it were, analyst.
Yeah, thanks, Manik. Yeah, so anyone who's a regular Regcast will probably recognise my ugly mug. Dale Vile, Freeform Dynamics. I'm here because we do a lot of Reg Reader studies. So we ask you guys watching regularly, what is it you care about? Why do you care about it? What do you not care about? And try and sort of make sense of all that and come to some conclusions. So we've done an awful lot of research actually around both DevOps and hybrid cloud or cloud of various forms. So we're going to be sort of making reference to some of that as we go through this.
Okay, Doug.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name's Doug Clark. I look after cloud computing for IBM here in the UK and Ireland. I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a topic that really fits well together. So thank you for having me.
Daniel.
Thank you, Manik. Hello, everybody. My name's Daniel Breston, and I'm Chief of DevOps for Ranger 4. Years of IT experience around the world, and also very good to be here with the cloud and DevOps.
Okay. Dale, do you want to give a quick bit more overview of what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, I mentioned we've done a lot of research with the Reg Readers, and what we found is that there's lots of, everyone's interested in taking on board new ideas, and everyone's making progress in various different ways with new ideas. And I've listed some of them here, for instance, new models like agile software development, for instance. We know a lot of the readers have been into that, a lot of organizations in general, and the various forms of cloud. You know, cloud can mean all sorts of things. And you know, out there in the Reg readership, we've got examples of people doing every form of cloud to different levels. Also, we're picking up that actually, you know, there's been a lot of investment in automation in various different ways. So in the development environment, for instance, lots of tooling around continuous integration and some of those sort of nice concepts to integrate development, test, release, and so on. And then on the operational side, we've had, you know, everything from tools from commercial vendors, IBM, VMware, Microsoft, and so on, helping with automated provisioning and workload management and so on, through to some of the more open source solutions that have crept in there. So we're seeing lots of automation pretty much across the board. The problem, though, is that a lot of this activity is quite siloed, quite fragmented. So you've got a team over here that's done some really good stuff methodology-wise or automation-wise, another team over here that's done some really good stuff themselves, but they haven't necessarily joined the dots. So the theme of today really is about joining the dots. It's about how do we, you know, build on all that good work that's been done and kind of raise it up a level and look at things across the board. And we'll be looking at that in various different ways as we go through.
That's great. Thank you, Dale. Now, before we get into the detail here, we're going to actually do a bit of scene setting and allow two our gentlemen here to provide us a definition of both what DevOps and continuous delivery are, because I think those, although they're not new concepts, they may well be unfamiliar to some, and also what hybrid cloud is. You surely know what hybrid cloud is. But first, Daniel, what do we mean by DevOps?
Well, originally it started off at the back end of a Twitter back, and tongue got stuck there. And it was about going back to your the silo mentality of development and operations and throwing things over the wall. And I think now it's what it should be. It's a business movement to use technology better, faster, safer to enable them to get a customer, which is what a business is all about. And with as less risk as possible and as low cost as possible, to be innovative, to do things, and that's what we're all about. And the cloud is a great way of doing that because the cloud allows a lot more flexibility than having your own data centers or whatever.
Good segue into what is hybrid. What do you mean by hybrid cloud?
Okay, so very simply, as we've described, there are a whole different load of workloads being developed at the moment. And we're going to touch on some of those in a minute. But each of those workloads really often predicates what type of cloud or what type of metabolism the infrastructure needs to operate at in order to make it fit for purpose. So actually we've got a number of different types of cloud. Not all clouds are the same, first of all. I don't just mean that from a vendor point of view, but in terms of their orientation. So you can have, clouds that are based on AIX, clouds that are even based on mainframe. But in addition to that, you've got not only some of the newer, funkier stuff in the sort of systems of engagement space, which is again where a lot of this agility comes from with minimum viable product, minimum viable service, and the rapid development of those. All of which are sort of very fashionable, very front end, very fast moving. But actually then you need to integrate that with the systems of record, the traditional back office systems that enterprises are famous for. It's really where the family silver resides. And tying both of those together, different types of cloud environments ultimately, marrying those together in an orchestrated way is what gets you to an enterprise hybrid cloud. And what's key about all of that is, it needs to be nicely, carefully orchestrated so that actually no one loses a pulse and all of the information that's transferred is effective.
And I think that's where we get into continuous delivery, of being ready to deliver, to deploy out into the environment, but not necessarily having to deploy if your business isn't ready. So it allows IT the ability to meet the cadence of the organization that they're servicing.
Hopefully that's a great overview of what we've been talking about, and beneath my image hopefully there'll be a little question box where you can type in any questions you may have, and I will put them to our industry luminaries. So, okay, without further ado, Doug, I think this first slide on software delivery being at the heart of today's innovation trends is something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, you pick up these themes from a lot of the market watchers that are out there, but these are the themes that I come across every day in my business. I look after all industries, so yesterday I was with a whole load of public sector clients, but this is the same across third sector as well as private sector business, whether you're a small startup type organisation right the way through to a major, multinational type organisation. And these are the themes on this chart that we call CAMS. It's and I know CAMS comes up in DevOps too, so maybe we'll touch on that. But it's cloud, it's analytics, it's mobile, it's social, it's security, and it's the Internet of Things. And all of this really is predicated by the API economy and the fact that all of these things are being developed more often than not now in an open cloud architecture. So what does that mean? It means you're not locked in as a supplier or as a vendor into any particular format. It's plug and playable, in other words. So the skills you've got are easily available on the market, and you can plug and play each of these things together. So you can, using for example our platform as a service, which is called Bluemix, you could plug a mobile component with a security component, with a messaging component, with an analytics component or cognitive computing, and basically start to build an app very, very rapidly. So it's that kind of thing, and then hooking that back into the back office systems where a lot of the legacy data resides as well to get the full value add. So each of these things then ties together, and that's really what I was describing before as kind of your systems of engagement space, and yeah, it's a really, really dynamic area, and I think each one of these themes is resonating at the moment with pretty much every customer I'm talking to.
Okay, so let's move on to the challenges.
And this is the challenge, is that on the previous slide we were right. We want to do software delivery, but then we also have to keep it up.
Yeah.
So once it's delivered, now what? Who takes care of it? When is it taken care of? How do we deal with systems of legacy like the HR system that may not be that system of engagement, the mobile front end or the web front end or something? And how do we make all of that one big flow from the business back to the customer and even out to the suppliers now? Because if you're going to be doing cloud, typically you're going to get another supplier like IBM in. And so now that value chain has increased. Yeah. And I think and now my CAMS, the culture of doing that, the automation of doing that, how do you measure that? How do you share that? And then Jez Humble went through in Lean. So how do you do that as quickly and safely and continuously improve and learn from that is all about what we're trying to get to in DevOps. And take away the word inefficient and make it, software delivery. Balance that mix of run and innovate, and maybe even make innovate the primary purpose instead of keep the lights on.
Exactly. Keeping the lights on is taking up pretty much everybody's budget, everybody's bandwidth. So, we have to move those skills to the front of the plane where a lot of the action's happening. If we don't do that, then we get at this thing called, what's it called, shadow IT emerging, and the IT community then totally loses control of the whole space and the governance.
I suspect you'll never get rid of shadow IT.
No, but I mean, there are ways of managing it because there are good alternatives quite often. But it's the fact that we're spending all of our time, focused on this 70% here, keeping the lights on and maintaining stuff. We need to use a lot more automation in that space, which is kind of back to the space we're talking about today. But then that allows us to move and actually start doing business strategy IT and adding value right at the front end, which I think is really exciting.
I hope we get there, because we've been talking about this issue for, I don't know, all the time I've been an industry watcher. So do we get on to kind of delving into the definition, I guess, really, of DevOps just a little bit further?
Well, I think I like this because it's somebody saying, I need something. And somebody saying, well, okay, we understand what you need, and now that we understand what you need, we're going to go and create it in such a way that if we give it to you, we are going to be able to manage it. And it goes straight back. It completes the loop of, yes, thank you very much. This is what I wanted. And it was given to me in such a way that I didn't have to wait 9, 10, 15,000 months and 100 million euros to tell you that, oops, you got it wrong. You worked with me across that entire process, and because of that, there was zero waste. And that's a key performance indicator. What is that cost of delay? Can you do right first time? And if you can meet those two key performance indicators, then you've got software development and delivery and customer satisfaction, that NPS score, as high as possible. And that's what we're trying to get to in this agile, lean, service management, DevOps-y thing.
Dale, do you believe this?
Yeah, I think, I hear lots of people talking about DevOps in different ways, and everyone picks up on a different benefit. A lot of people talk about the fact that it's rapid delivery. By joining everything up end to end, then you can flush things through the whole process a lot quicker than you could with traditional methods. We'll get into what that means in terms of tooling and teams and process and other things that are necessary. But actually, by integrating things end to end as well, particularly when in a lot of organizations you don't have a choice but to move quickly, that enhances quality. So whether that's quality in terms of number of faults in the software, whether it's quality in terms of whether it performs physically very well, or whether it's fit for purpose. The whole point of this is to just drive that quality level up or maintain that quality level. So that's a really important part of it. And then other people pick up on the efficiency thing. I mean, if you harmonize the whole process, you have fewer handoffs, everyone is working at the same set of objectives, the same set of overarching metrics at least, then you've not got a lot of that traditional tension and a lot of those traditional conflicts. So everything just becomes a lot smoother and less costly.
Hope you're right. But there are challenges. Who wants to discuss those?
So, well, a lot of the complexes are very manual at the minute, right? And good reason for that, because, a lot of our historical experience has been built on the legacy systems we were talking about. And those were heavily customized, either heavily customized by the, if you like, the internal IT of the customer or the outsourcer or whoever was providing the service in terms of the strategic implementer. And in a lot of cases, what we've done is, with things like ERP and the like, is we've essentially rebuilt using new shiny IT, historical old business processes. We've never really come down to this simplification, standardization, and moving more to the vanilla kind of level. So I think, there's a lot of issues there around those processes, and it's moving those on and making them obviously virtualized, making them standardized, making them automated, and that whole approach, I think, just, adds fuel to the fire.
Yeah, I think on the manual versus automation side as well, quite often it's a case of the core capability gets ahead of the ability to manage it. I mean, if you go back just a few years to just rolling out virtual server architectures, the virtual server capability was a lot more advanced than the ability to manage virtual servers. That caught up. There was a lag of sort of 18 months, 2 years that we were tracking, and we spent a lot of time talking about that and events like this. And I think that goes across the board. I mean, we're seeing the same now with containers, for instance. Containers are great new technology, but actually have people really figured out how we're going to integrate them into the whole of our delivery processes, and is the tooling there to allow that to be done? And the answer is no and no to those at the moment. It's all a big work in progress. So So in the meantime, people need to just get on with managing things the best they can, and that's how you end up with manual processes.
And the best use cases, I suspect.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's fine as long as you're working in those small scale silos. But to the point where we started, when you start to scale these things up and you start to apply these technology and techniques across the organisation, and to your slide, with the CAM slide pulling everything together, when you're trying to integrate everything, then it starts to really matter. So
and some of those applications, even away from this slide, they're coming in as software as a service. So you've got a whole
Absolutely.
set of different things to try and accommodate here.
yeah.
And I think it gets even more challenging for very large organizations, because you're going to have your development environment in a lot of different locations. You're going to have your infrastructure in a lot of different locations. And how do you coordinate all that movement? So it's one thing to say we'll move we'll have teams, but physically a lot of people can't locate those teams into the same place. So how do we create these virtual teams that allow that delivery of something? I grew up in IT back when I provided every single piece of IT for a major bank up to the terminal. Now, banks have clients that are using their own phone. So how do you know that you're giving them the best possible service? And that's just an entirely new challenge for organizations that have grown up with hundreds of millions of something, legacy stuff. And how do you change that quickly to meet the demand?
This is a perennial problem for any large organisation, isn't it? Knowing where your stuff is, knowing where your people are, knowing where your skills are.
Yeah.
And dealing with dependencies, because I think it's interesting talking about systems of engagement versus systems of record. But when you look at a system of engagement, a mobile app, say, chances are it's going to tap into some back end somewhere through some API layer.
Yeah.
If that API layer doesn't move quickly, that becomes a bottleneck if you're trying to iterate that application. So, in many ways, the line is blurring, I think, between, we had this debate before coming on air about two-speed IT, which, some people talk about. I think settling and saying, well, in our systems of record, we can live with, laborious, slow-moving, traditional techniques. And we just apply the fast stuff over on the front end of the business. That's becoming less and less valid because of the dependencies and the requirement for integration between the two worlds.
And the questions about, at the bottom, how do we ensure, force the issue of DevOps, which is collaboration, communication, and cooperation. How do we ensure means that we understand that and we've communicated it and we cooperate together to do this. And if we're not able to do that, change of organization, that change of interactions, we're never going to use automation properly.
I think Dale raised a good point a wee while back when he was talking about the value chain. We're melting away the edges of the traditional enterprise, right? And we're hooking into not only our traditional value chain in terms of our suppliers, we're moving up to our distributors and customers, but actually we're bringing in a whole load of third parties. So it's more of a value net. And you're not in control of a lot of those feeds. I mean, you might be in control of the connection with the API piece, but you don't know the metabolism that, for example, IBM's just acquired the Weather Channel, the Weather Com. So, what speed's that coming at? You need something else for those delivery guys. You need geospatial data. You need each one of those feeds, if you like, might have a different metabolism or pulse that you need to integrate with that kind of back office system. So you've got to be flexible. So that comes back to a couple of points I've seen in cloud, which I think ties back into it, which was the first era of cloud was all about cost takeout, cost efficiency, and we've gotten over that, it's inherent, it's mandated within it. Then we moved on to agility, which is what this conversation is all about. But we're also starting to see a third era, which is all about collaboration, which I think again ties fundamentally back into this theme of interoperability and doing it in a slick way with the minimum amount of pain and the minimum amount of error on the way.
Interesting you mentioned business agility, because I think if we're ready to move on to this one, I think this is kind of where we're at, isn't it? Daniel, isn't this your piece?
I think it is enterprise capability, and it's enterprise capability to create something that gives the customer an opportunity to feed back to them so that we can continue to create something that they can continue to feed back to us. So it's that, that flow of rhythm at the bottom, as you see, this cycle of activity that provides innovation, feedback, and improvement. But innovation, feedback, and improvement, very quick. So really having the customer with you, almost all the time, and getting that feedback all the time so that you can improve all the time. And you can only do that with the proper use of technology.
And how does that work in human terms? I think we were talking earlier about what happens to the people, and you don't have to go into huge amounts of detail, but...
But, I mean, we started with the HR department. The HR department came and went, the biggest problem we have with IT in this large bank that we were working with was when we hire somebody, from the time that they start working to the time that they're fully enabled with technology, it's about 10 days. So the first 2 weeks you're hired, that's fantastic, you're on holiday. You can't do any email, you can't do anything else, okay? How do we change that? And HR was saying, IT is the bottleneck, and we were going, nah, I don't think so. And until you actually get down and start communicating and do that cooperation and look at that whole chain of, that customer to what are we trying to do, and how do you use these systems, and what are the roadblocks and obstacles against it? And how do we automate that particular change? And actually, why are we doing that particular approval? And can we use products like Urban Code or Orchestra to make things faster so that we balance that speed and cost to improve our quality and lower our risk? Once you start really doing that with sophisticated tools like Post-it notes, then you can map that technology against it, and you really do start getting customer feedback because now the customer is driving it.
Okay.
And that's great because that gets you a sticky customer, right? That's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Can I just add one point on that last one though? Because it's easy to do this, relatively easy to do this in a small scale environment. So if you're developing a mobile app to go on the App Store and that's it, you've got one app, maybe two apps, you can iterate and you can do all this stuff very, very easily without a lot of sophistication. If you're a bank and you've got 200, 500 active projects, all driving in this kind of way, this becomes pretty hairy, which is why a lot of people are still not at that level in terms of applying this kind of approach. Because managing this at scale is the problem. I think it's a scalability issue.
And I think the next slide goes a little bit toward addressing that, because we have to change the way that we work. And everybody goes, okay, IT, you change the way that you work. So, well, hold on, business, you actually give us the budget. So we need you to give us our budget. Don't tell us what we have to do in August, but tell us what we have to do every single month, which is what lean budgeting is about. And how do we visualize that workflow? And how do we know that we're working on the right thing at the right time? So let's not have these long projects. Every week, let's get together to make sure that we're working on or every month, let's make sure that we're working together on the right thing. And let's take advantage of things that aren't really new. I mean, XP started 20 years ago, but let's take advantage of how we can embrace the way that things can change, whether you call it infrastructure change or software change, in such a way that those practices promote your ability, Mr. Business, okay, to provide a customer, which is what a business is about, it's just to create a customer, in such a way that from idea to delivery, that happens.
It sounds interesting because, thinking about the practical process of that, that involves a lot of buy-in, doesn't it, from, say, business unit managers who want to get on with running their business unit rather than dealing with IT.
Yep. But if you read the book that everybody points to, the Phoenix Project, the first half of the book is all about IT going on a journey of failure and disaster. And the second half of the book is we spent 15 minutes with every major stakeholder, and we asked them two questions. What are your goals? What are your obstacles for the next 3 months? What are your goals? What are your obstacles? What are your goals? What are your obstacles? And you go back into the IT world and you look at all your projects, your 200 projects, and you go, goal, obstacle, yes. Goal, obstacle, yes. Goal, obstacle, no. Stop it. And that's what DevOps is asking you to do, is to ask that question, why are you doing what you're doing? What is it really helping?
Yeah, but it's beyond that as well, though, isn't it? You can't just. What you've described there is absolutely critical.
It's nirvana.
But it does require some behavioural change on the part of the business guys, because one of the perennial problems with business stakeholders is their availability. How many times have we run projects and you drag them kicking and screaming to the first kick-off workshop where you get all of the objectives signed off, and then you don't see them again for another 6 months. If you have actually scheduled them to be at a particular review meeting or whatever, they don't turn up because there's been an important. if you're going to operate in this kind of way, those guys need to learn that they need to be involved. IT is as much theirs as it's not something that just is delegate, fire and forget, and then come back and see what the result is in 6 months' time. They've got to be involved.
Yep.
And you've got to make that easy for them. So that's where a lot of the process is required in order to get that kind of alignment without making it onerous and burdensome.
This is fascinating because, you know, historically pre-cloud, right? You'd have to go through all sorts of financial hoops and loops to get the budget to buy your server, and then it would take like 3 months for the server to arrive, and then the IT guys would come and get it to a level where you could actually start doing something with it. So you're like 4 months in. Yeah. That's the sort of pace that business have gotten used to. And I think now, because we can operate at cloud speed and do a lot more of these, you know, prototyping kind of methodologies that we're talking about. We see a lot of startups apply, and it's becoming much more pervasive through enterprises as well. They're able to try out many, many more scenarios. So I think there is an appetite in business to actually engage. I was working with an insurance client over the last couple of years that was trying to apply some of the new legislation they were facing off, and historically it would have been maybe 1 or 2 scenarios they were able to test out, whereas in reality they were now able to test out 13 scenarios in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks rather than months and months and months, and then start to pull in the tractor beam. You know, and start to get to the point where there's a lot more business confidence and therefore IT confidence in what the end solution was going to be for that particular project. So I think there's a confluence of, you know, rivers here all meeting at the same time, whether it's, you know, agile and lean, whether it's DevOps, whether it's cloud, all of this kind of what we call disruption, and it's one of the buzzword bingo words, isn't it? But this disruption is actually coming just at the right time to have maximum
and
impact.
certainty and stability goes out the window, because, you know, if you're going to investigate 12 different options for taking something to market, different ways of doing it, you have a view of what the likely outcomes are going to be. But then as you put those things out into the field, into the hands of customers, things happen that you didn't expect. Opportunities crop up, and you think, wow, if we just build on that, actually, so you can take that campaign, that product launch, that whatever, and now in a totally different direction. But you can only do that if you've got good communication, because these are business decisions, they're not IT decisions.
And I think that's the focus of, you know, back when I started with an IT, the definition of IT was it up?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And now the definition of IT is are you using it? And whether it's an internal user or an external user, actually we don't care anymore. People just want it, just like you go home, you turn the lights on.
Yeah.
And because of that customer experience and that quicker time to value of having that experience is now paramount, okay? So spending hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever, depending on what size business you are, to keep your technology up and running, now people are going home and they're using technology from the moment they walk in the door. There's some things you can't watch anymore. You've got to get it through the internet, okay? There's, you know, things that you do on your mobile phone, which everybody now has. You know, back in the old days, a phone was a phone. Now it's an application provider for you to have fun. It's a game center, and you need to be able to get through that and have that capacity to do that innovation. So you go back to work and you beat your IT vendor up.
So it's all about the business advantage.
Yeah, it's all about the business advantage.
So, any more?
Well, I was going to say, those guys that get it, they really get it. And we've done studies ourselves where clients that have really gotten into this whole landscape and done it very effectively, done it in a very joined up way where the business is totally engaged, they're getting, you know, 2 times revenue growth compared to their peers. And these peers aren't stupid, right? These are all very successful organizations. They're getting 2 times revenue growth and 2.5 times profit growth. So not only are they lean and agile and being able to do stuff just at the, you know, at cloud speed, as I was describing before, but they're actually getting an unfair advantage in terms of their typical financial metrics or the typical metrics they've been measured by the street, for example. And I think, you know, it's win, 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 win. But there's pain in achieving that because it is a constant transformation. Once you start this journey, you never stop the transformation. That's the constant throughout it all.
So let me reiterate that. I mean, you mentioned IBM research there. I mean, we haven't published this research yet, but we found pretty much exactly the same metrics, 2.5 times business benefit. What I would say though is you tend to find behaviours sort of go hand in hand, and sometimes unravelling cause from effect is quite hard. So those organisations that tend to be doing DevOps, for instance, really well and have a good solid hybrid cloud strategy in place, also have a very fluid, iterative, continuous approach to product management, for instance. Nothing to do with IT, just the way in which they're delivering value out to their customers. So they've moved away themselves from 6 months, 9 month product cycles where you do some market research and then you do some prep, and you know, and that I think is important because this is part of a whole collection of behaviours, if you like, which drives business advantage. But you're absolutely right, 2.5 times performance, whether it's revenue, customer acquisition, profit, you know, all the metrics you look at, you find those kind of boosts, which is great.
And I think DevOps is forcing that last sentence on there about the shift of resources. It's not and now we can get rid of people. We're seeing those types of savings, those types of amounts that you guys mentioned. But we're doing it because we're using the people that we have in our organization better, faster, smarter.
Exactly.
And we're letting everybody play. So that, you know, the guys of record, the system legacy guys, can play in the DevOps culture, the DevOps movement, the use of this stuff, just as much as the webby techie guys.
So we've had a question, which I think will take us back to fundamentals, really. How does IT facilitate business to deliver in a quick, smart way as asked by customers? And this discussion is going to enterprise thinking. We need to move to disruptive models.
You need to get some early quick wins, to be honest, and you'll always, in most larger organisations anyway, you'll find certain very, very hungry stakeholders in the business. Quite often they're in marketing nowadays, people doing digital initiatives, for instance. Those guys want to move more quickly than traditionally IT has been able to move. So they're a prime candidate for saying, look, let's prove some concepts here, let's demonstrate what can be done if we work in a slightly different way. Once you do that, you promote the hell out of it internally. And over the course of time, when you look at organisations that have scaled it up, that they've done as much internal marketing and promotion of those successes, and people then want to be part of it, which...
And then fast forward and fast fail. I mean, the whole point of this is you're going to make mistakes along the way. So just as long as you're learning from them, then, you know, there's value in those mistakes as well. And I think you're right. Start with some guinea pig type projects. Make sure they're highly visible. Communicate. The more transparency you have, the more likely you have of adoption longer term.
And we chose those guinea pig projects by looking at the service desk. And instead of looking at the service desk in, okay, we closed 2,000 incidents this month, we went, well, who had the biggest pain? And then we actually went and talked to those individuals that used that application, that called in the most or whatever, and without talking about them about IT, was how can we help you do what you need to do better, faster, safer? And then we went back and redesigned something for that particular area of the bank or the electronics firm or whatever our customer wanted, and they came back and went, this is pretty good, okay? And that was our quick win. So you have to, and I like, you know, your quick wins. You need to be able to take somebody in the business and make them the champion of DevOps. If IT is the champion of DevOps, it's doomed to die. If the business is the champion of DevOps, you have success. And that goes through with even use of the cloud, because they've got to let go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So small enough to manage, but important enough to make a difference and to actually matter. That's...
One more question. How to approach single pipeline development and deployment for a hybrid cloud approach if we don't have a VPN or direct line with a cloud service provider, and ideally you would need to publish your internal tools to the internet to be accessible. But is it accessible on cloud, and what security considerations do we need to take into account, like AD, for example?
Crumbs. Where'd you start with that one?
Yeah,
that's very detailed.
We're going to have to keep it brief.
Yeah, I was.
We need to crack off.
Well, obviously the connection is key. From our point of view, we can, you know, with our cloud, you can get a dedicated connection from your data center or from your machine room right into our cloud. Once you're in the cloud, you got a number of choices. Whether you go for a shared virtualized environment, which is, you know, if you like, the cheapest of the formats, the most common of the formats. You can have dedicated virtualized where you don't have noisy neighbors, or you can have bare metal, in which case you've pretty much got the kit. So it's almost like having your own data center, and it feels like you've got your own data center because you've got a dedicated network and all that to it. I mean, that would be, that's the closest you're going to get to running exactly what you've already got today, but doing it in a cloud environment in a utility model.
You heard it there from IBM. I'm going to move on.
Okay.
Thanks all the same. So thanks for that, and keep the questions coming. And we're going to move on, I think, to the next question of actually balancing, optimizing existing systems with innovation. Was that?
Well, I think we've kind of touched on
we touched on a lot of this
already. I think historically enterprises have got skills there on the left-hand side in the systems of record space, the things like ERP or HR systems, finance systems, things like that. There'll be some family silver in there, whether it's an automotive design company or whatever it might be. I think the systems of engagement is kind of the newer stuff. You might be needing to onboard those skills or hire them, and I think that's again part of this challenge we've got is marrying up both of those things. But I would suggest that it may well be that those little guinea pig projects we've got possibly fall more into the systems of engagement space, because there's less risk, if you like, or less baggage associated with that, or we've got to get started somewhere. I'd start there. We're seeing now more clients tying all of that back in. We've seen a number of clients, we've announced a number of clients, Lufthansa's one, ABN AMRO's another, WPP and so on and so forth, are going what I describe as all in on cloud, but it's not like a flicking a big switch. This is going to take years to actually migrate some of that stuff. And some of the stuff may never, some of these systems of record may never have a trajectory to cloud. They may never go anywhere. So you need to have that orchestration piece that you were talking about that just spans the thing. That then gives you the granularity to be able to see right down at a stock keeping unit or at a project level or whatever, what the costs are within your business. So you can see much more, the business can see much more visibly the cost of running the business, or cost of running that project, or cost of running that department, and account for it accordingly.
Okay, thanks. So we kind of dealt quite a lot with DevOps. We haven't really touched in any detail on hybrid cloud. So that's our next piece. But before we get to that, we have just one more question. Which I think probably gets to the nub of it for an awful lot of watchers. Can smaller organisations with limited resources hope to take advantage of this stuff in a similar way? Which I think is a very fine question.
I'll take that one. Absolutely. So I think this is a real David and Goliath kind of landscape here. I'm seeing big organisations wanting to use cloud to start acting as a more nimble organisation. So they're trying to move the direction that way. Whereas with cloud, because you don't have to spend all of your seed corn funding or your venture capital funding on technology, you just rent the stuff for as long as you want it, and you turn it off. Yeah. And then you move on, turn it off, move on, turn it off, whatever. It's becoming a much more balanced playing field. And that's where I'm starting to see a lot of interesting dynamics as well. Again, going back to this point of disruption before, we're seeing a much broader landscape of players. Boutique kind of players. And that's making it really interesting because there's some really dynamic thinking coming out there. And I think, for example, in the UK government space, that's what they were trying to mean when they brought out G-Cloud, was this idea of trying to pull in some of these subject matter experts rather than just rely on some of the bigger companies to do outsourcing. They wanted to have the pick and mix of the best of the best. And I think that's really where this balancing act comes from the question.
And Daniel, from a DevOps perspective, smaller organizations.
Well, I think, from a smaller organization, you have to make a decision. And the decision is do you want to buy stuff and, oh no, wait, I need it twice because I need to have a disaster recovery environment just in case my first stuff goes down. That means a network. And all of a sudden, you now are managing an IT environment. Or do you want to do what your business is? And if you can start to think that I'm here to create a customer, and I'm here to get my next customer, and I'm here not to stay small, so let me go and make use of technology in a way that enables my business to do stuff. Then you're starting to blend that cloud and DevOps environment to go back to the focus of everything, which is the customer, and the use of technology to get that customer or manage what you do in a day-to-day action, your HR or whatever, as smoothly as possible.
Okay.
Can I just say you need tooling to do this stuff to take it to the next level. In small businesses inherently do sort of a DevOps thing because everyone's doing a bit of everything. There are loads of open source options if you want to start and do things on site. But actually, if you look at something like IBM's Bluemix, for instance, and just look at the bill of materials of what's on offer there. There's an awful lot of tooling available that's just there as you start working in that cloud environment.
You could be coding in minutes, and the actual amount of coding you do is a type of coding that I think the business guys can get their heads around. And I don't mean that they do the coding, but actually you can get them to the conversation much quicker.
And the control structures are there as well.
Yes.
So you've got everything around the outside of that you need to scale it.
So we're going to get to the enabling the hybrid environment. Before we do, just let me say that there was a question earlier on about asking about further reading. The last slide on this webinar will have a list of links and further reading that you can take advantage of. So enabling the hybrid environment.
Yeah, so again, this plays back to a lot of the conversation we've had already. You know, you don't want to do any of this stuff in isolation. You've got historical legacy systems, you know, most enterprises have anyway, unless you're a startup, in which case you're probably born on the cloud. You're going to have some kind of mixed estate, either through acquisition or whatever. That, you know, obviously needs to be maintained because you're keeping the lights on, but somehow or another, you've got to integrate it, you know, and this is where, again, IBM's very actively pushed down the open standards route with, you know, OpenStack for cloud, with Cloud Foundry and cloud, you know, from a platform level with Bluemix, and also starting to move into the containerized space. That's where a lot of the developers are now heading. So you can then tap into all of these little themes around the edge. And these are, we talked about before, these may not be skills that you have inherently within your organization. So you need to be able to partner with people. And that's, again, where open standards kick in, because this is going to be plug and play. You're going to love some of them. You're going to fall out with some of them. So you want to be able to swap in and swap out some of these services. I mean, you know, there was a conversation recently that we had at a CIO dinner, which was all about really what we ought to be trying to do here is to come up with some sort of scheme where we have prenups. Because, you know, I was talking to one big retailer and they said it took us half a day to get into cloud. It's taken us 2.5 years once we decided the strategy was wrong to move off of it for that and move it in-house and build our own internal cloud. So I think you've got to have that business strategy built into this kind of an enablement discussion and chart. But this is where the API economy comes in, and this is where tools like Bluemix with API management kick in, because you can hook in Internet of Things, or you can hook in, you know, cognitive computing and some of those analytics tools to really start to bolster your existing space. And this kind of just, again, ties it off this chart here, which is almost like a pyramid. You're going to have a mixed estate. You're going to have systems of record. Probably some of the stuff that, as I mentioned, won't migrate off of those historical legacy systems, may not move to a cloud, even an internal on-premise cloud. But you're going to have a blend where it's appropriate to put some of those workloads that aren't strategic into a public cloud environment and run them as effectively and as cost efficiently as possible, with allowing for, you know, backups and resilience and all of that. But then you're going to have either on-premise private cloud capabilities, or you're going to go to a preferred third-party supplier for those private clouds, and it's going to be the blend of all of it. And it will have, you know, it'll be like an ER room. It will have a pulse. You'll have all of these life sign metrics being provided to you.
So let me just say, from a Reg research point of view, what they tell us when we ask you guys out there is that they're already doing all this. We use that cloud for that, we'll use this architecture for that in-house, we'll use this other cloud for doing this, we'll mix a little bit of software as a service in. And so they're already doing that, right? That's the state of play, but it's not integrated.
It's
so
not
they've
the
got
dots.
Authentication, identity management problems. They've got workload provisioning and management. You know, they've got 3 or 4 different provisioning systems just for the platform as a service stuff, and so on. And so, in my mind, what hybrid cloud is about, if you were to sort of say, well, what's the objective here? It's to kind of raise up a level and say we want all that flexibility, because we're not going to stop using all of these things. Necessarily, we need a blend of stuff, but we want overall visibility and overall management in a coherent and coordinated way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, the development of an idea until that idea is operational, which is a different way of describing DevOps, you know, it's exactly this. Do we need to, you know, what tools do we really need? How much expertise do we need? And how can we bolt these tools together in such a way that we get to the provisioning of something for the people that want it as quickly as possible? And that's where, you know, it's the same steps. They don't change, okay? We just want to do it in a slightly different manner so that we're always ready. It goes back to our definition of continuous delivery, which is what we were talking about before we walked in here. You don't necessarily have to give it to anybody, but you need to be ready to give it to somebody. And I think you had a brilliant example on that.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's quite a few examples of cloud service providers out there who maybe do 3 or 4 major releases a year. But if you look at the way they organize themselves internally, at the end of every day, they're ready to release if they had to. And I think that release readiness is really what continues. There's a difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. Having something ready to go doesn't necessarily mean that you flush it through into the live environment.
Yeah, and that's what our customers are finding now, is that they're in a better position to do something if the business is ready. Going back to your point of we can't always get the business. Well, at least we're ready.
Yep.
So when the business does decide to come to us, okay, we're ready.
You can act.
Yeah, we can act. And I think that's what cloud, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, thinking about this in such a way that you can do quick, faster, safer, better with less risk is what we're all about.
So I've got one more point to make on this chart's as good as any to do it. I mean, there's a chart which maybe we should have had, which we don't have. If you imagine a Venn diagram, you've got all of the DevOps tooling on one side, and you've got all of the cloud tooling on the other side. 2 circles, these guys will overlap quite a bit around provisioning, around platform management, workload management, around monitoring, because we haven't actually said this big time before, but a huge part of DevOps is the feedback mechanism, being able to monitor and manage. That's both at a physical level as well as a business level, how well things are going. So really, when you look at a lot of tooling is the same. If you're going to rapidly deploy, then you need that provisioning and workload management capability. And that almost by definition is going to involve cloud. So it's important to have this tooling in place, because if you take a simple development, test, staging, production environment, this might be maybe a virtual machine sitting on a server somewhere under a developer's desk. The second might be an Amazon environment or an IBM environment in the cloud. The third might... Anyway, the point is that you might have part of a server here, a couple of servers here, and as you go up through and you migrate through the different stages, you end up with a full-blown, fault-tolerant, 30, 40 server environment in the production scenario. You need to be able to manage everything, the flow of software builds through that whole life cycle. So the tools you use to manage your different cloud environments are pretty much the same sort of tools that you would use to promote things through that kind of structure as well.
And that goes back to the operations people being involved at the planning stage instead of being involved at the arrow between deploy and production. Yes. If we're involved at the very beginning, then we can start to work with people as they develop, get some feedback, as they build, get some feedback, as they test. Oh wait, that's not going to work. Hold on, let's go back. Okay, and stop the cord, which is a very lean type of thing to say. Stop the cord before we go and give something that makes us a front page news story.
Got a question for you, Daniel, just kind of on that point, maybe.
Okay.
The difference between DevOps and SIAM, a reader asks, seems very similar to me.
Let's see, part of my answer could be stay tuned for something we're doing in about 4 hours, another webinar. SIAM is really tied into this, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, okay, we're not going to do everything in IT. What we want to do is we want to take advantage of people that can provide us best of service for what we want to do. But we need to maintain that accountability. So before we used to do everything in-house, now we want to try to take advantage of people that are doing things elsewhere. And whether that's a cloud provider or whether that's a software as a service provider or somebody that's just doing something different than us, taking advantage of developers in another country that are still signed into us. That whole system integration or service integration and the management of that, okay, is what we're trying to get to. What DevOps says is, can you do that in such a way that you're always ready? How do you test that? How do you get that feedback? How do you improve that entire cycle so that it doesn't just become another onerous thing that you're putting on top? So I think the blend of DevOps and SIAM really enables an organization to do better, faster, safer.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to move on to an example we have here with Fidelity Worldwide, which I think, Doug, you wanted to speak to, but perhaps you could tie in as well. There's a question here asking business critical applications and servers, why not in a public cloud if the infrastructure suits? So maybe you could kind of tie that into the answer of this.
Yeah, sure. So this is Fidelity Worldwide Investments, and this is just a good example. There are a number of examples in this same kind of space, but this is just, it's almost taking out one of the steps, or not taking out, is concentrating on one of the steps in the previous chart where you were showing the logic flow going across. This is just showing that, for an organisation, and Fidelity Worldwide Investments they're not laggards in the market here. These guys are pretty astute business folks. Obviously, they've been very successful as well. But even so, it's this restless and relentless re-evaluation of your business process and constantly looking for how can I further and further and further and further improve that. And in this case, being able to take out another $2.3 million a year out of, in terms of cost avoidance, which is the takeaway business message here, is a really good exhibit of, by using Urban Code Deploy in this context, they were able to, not only de-risk the process, but actually save a wedge of money that could be then reused and redeployed somewhere else, maybe for one of those more funky projects at the front end. I don't know, but it's just a really good example, and there are a number of these now that are coming up, which is playing back to this theme today. It's the joining the dots piece. Yeah. If we seriously join the dots and think about that Venn diagram that you very kindly mentioned there, Dale, this is the sort of takeaway from it. That's why we're doing it.
And I think Hiscox, followed the same type of path where they used the tooling and technology, and they got to continuous release and continuous delivery and continuous deployment, but they also got to continuous learning. And once upon a time, there was only one or two people that were able to push the release button, and now anybody can push the release button. And they know why they need to push the release button, and they're allowed to do that in such a way that they can do this thing safely. And I think that experiment of trying this stuff in such a way that you learn how to do it better was the most important takeaway from Hiscox when we were doing it with them.
Okay, so time has been a thief.
Go ahead.
The second part of the question you asked was, why couldn't you move an enterprise system to a public cloud?
Yes.
Yeah. There's nothing stopping you.
Yeah.
Right? It's really a matter of making sure that you've still got all those other steps in place you need to take into account. So think about, are there going to be network constraints around it? Do you have an issue around response times or things like that? Is that going to create a problem for you? What about security? What about things like noisy neighbors and things like that? So it's just a matter of working your way. And I think, if we start with a smallish project and you start to build your own confidence, start to understand how you do it, then ultimately, why wouldn't you put some of those systems out there?
And there's legacy inertia issues and all those sorts of questions.
Exactly. And actually what you may do with some stuff is just throw away legacy and build a new whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So we've come to wrap up time. We're running out of time rapidly, but time's been a thief to us. We've got so much more to say, but perhaps we could sort of start to pull together some of the threads we've been talking about. Who wants to talk about this?
Well, I think this goes back to, we've all said from the very beginning, it's no longer just develop it and put it live. It's take it from the idea and put it to the market is what we're trying to do in this thing called DevOps. And how do you blend the old IT service management processes and combine them with the capabilities and practices of Lean or Agile or TOGAF or whatever else you'd like to put into it, and take advantage then of great products like Bluemix or Urban Code or all the open source products to help you get to market, which is the goal of a business, get to market.
One of the things I was going to say, which we've not touched on today, but fits very well with this same kind of thinking, is using things like hackathons. Either internal hackathons or external hackathons as a way of helping you generate some of those new ideas. I mean, I've worked with a number of companies that have deployed different types of hackathons. Again, there's no prescribed model. Some of this stuff you need to just fit around your own culture, your own organisation. But for example, working with Wimbledon, which IBM helps be technology partner for. We've done hackathons there. We came up with something like 7 applications in 24, 48 hours, things like that. You can generally come up with like a year's worth of IP in a couple of days. Now, that's just the idea piece. Don't get me wrong. This is not a hard and fast thing, but you've got the basic wireframing of an application sufficiently either built or storyboarded, working with a consumer packaging company, they can build a storyboarded product. They can take to focus groups, start doing that early iteration we were chatting about, to just sort of say, what do you think? Would this work? Does that help? And then you can start to do that. It's the onboarding piece of this iterative cycle we're talking about today.
And you can get innovative if you just ask the question, what happens if we turn it off? What happens if we just turn it off? If you didn't have any IT today, how would you keep the business in business? How long could we stay in business? And those types of discussions with the stakeholders and with the suppliers in the room start to drive you to change.
Exactly.
Okay.
So kind of like from this point of view, this is how this whole cascade works out. We were talking before about, quite often cloud providers would come at it and start from the infrastructure as a service piece and build up. I prefer most clients, most organizations, and hopefully most viewers start thinking about it in terms of what is it you're actually trying to do, and it may well be that, software as a service is the easiest way of solving that particular problem or good enough. Yeah, that's vanilla, good enough, let's do it for that particular type of workload application. But it's working your way down and cascading that down, going through, test and system testing, user acceptance testing, and moving it all into production using tools like, as we mentioned before, Urban Code. But there's evolutions and derivations of that. I mean, last week IBM announced IBM Relay, which again is a great way of cascading this kind of update cycle into a whole raft of different types of cloud, some of which are IBM, some of which don't need to be IBM clouds, but it just allows you to have that consistency across geographies as well as across different types of cloud. So, things like Bluemix and SoftLayer are perfect for it, but there are other flavors out there.
Dale, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Doug's just mentioned is suppliers like IBM are just removing the friction from the technology piece of this whole thing. What's really interesting is I was speaking to someone who, unfortunately I can't mention who it is, it's a big bank, very, very aggressively gone for DevOps in a strategic way. They've been running it for 4 or 5 years or so, started small, now it's pretty much the way they do everything. And I spoke to the program manager for that and said, if you could go back 4 years and do just one thing differently, what would it be? He said, I would have briefed senior execs on the business side of the house from day one, and I would have worked to start changing their mindset and their behavior. And it goes back to one of the things that we had on one of the previous slides, continuous business management, just that kind of more fluid approach to whether it's product management, whether it's managing performance of a business unit or whatever. That kind of continuous approach is alien to a lot of business people. And if you're working with a traditional mindset, DevOps is actually quite hard. Get the business guys in there to begin with. Second point I'll make from this last slide, actually, this is my slide, is we talked to a lot of people who are actually doing really well on the left-hand side is development automation, so continuous integration. Right-hand side, they're using Puppet, Chef, IBM tools, VMware tools, etc. And they're doing really well over there. What they're not necessarily doing is pulling the two together. And that's really what we're talking about in terms of continuous delivery. So it's having that bit in the middle, a build sitting on a platform. You might change that discussion to talk about containers nowadays, but basically the bit in the middle is ready to go at any one moment in time. And that little bit at the bottom there, business and operational level feedback, the business level feedback is as important as the operational level feedback. So it's all got to be business driven. But we're building on stuff that's already taking place. Those two circles are already very active.
Daniel, 1 minute, final thought.
And I think the assessments that we do, because we run a big assessment process, it's interesting that, yes, we talk about automation, what are the tools that you're using, but we also talk about what is the culture of your organization? How do you measure that? How do you share that? Okay, so if you don't do all of that, you're not using your automation correctly. So you really need to get that entire business and operational level feedbacks so that you can improve. And if you don't look at the culture of the organization, the way that they interact, then the way that you use technology is just another hammer in a toolbox, big deal.
Yep.
Doug?
I would say, definitely have a look at the reading material at the end of the webinar, but just get started. Go have a go at something.
Mm.
That'd be my takeaway.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I hope you've found this useful, enjoyable even. There is a survey that you can feed us back on, tell us how rubbish we were or not, as the case may be. So I'd like to thank you very much for watching. There is some further reading hopefully now on your screen, and if you found it useful, well, as I say, do let us know. And that's the end of the webinar. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.